It's time for a reality check. We're here to deconstruct health and fitness trends and provide tangible advice so you can become 1% better with each choice starting today. Welcome back to Reality Check. We are your hosts, Jess and Jill. And last week we talked about how not to reverse diet. So it just made sense today to talk about how not to diet. I feel like there are a plethora of ways that individuals and women specifically go about dieting just the wrong way, too aggressive. So we want to get into specifics so that you understand and can maybe audit yourself and see where you're going wrong and where you can optimize so that dieting doesn't feel, one, really hard, and two, like a lifelong tortuous adventure, if you will. So we have really like 10 points we want to make here to hit home, and they all really tend to overlap in some way, but there's really kind of like 10 things we want to make sure that you're not doing when you go on your next diet or on your current one. The first one, and I feel like we talk about this a lot with our clients, is not eating enough protein. Jessica, do you want to give us the rundown?
Yeah, so losing weight does not equate to losing body fat. So we always talk about this, in an optimal, ideal world, my clients during a muscle building phase, their weight might not change at all, but they're losing inches every week, right? That is a sign that they're building muscle and they're losing body fat. The opposite scenario that I would say happens quite a bit when people do extreme fad diets or try to just cut crazy calories and add cardio all at once or cut food groups without focusing on nutrients is if we see weight loss, but we don't see inches go down, right? That's a huge indication that we're not losing body fat. We're losing maybe water weight or muscle weight or a combo of the three. So the way to maintain and preserve your healthy, lean muscle mass is going to be to eat enough protein during your diet. Our protein recommendations don't really change whether dieting or building. You're going to base your protein recommendations off of your body weight and or lean body weight. And eat as much stinking protein as you can. We always find it's harder to eat enough protein when you have less caloric wiggle room to play with. So practice eating enough protein when you have flexibility, when you're not dieting. But it's really, really important that when you cut calories, you don't skimp on protein on accident, which I think happens oftentimes. So some signs that you might be losing muscle would be, again, if your inches aren't dropping, even though the scale is dropping. If your strength is fading over time, we don't want to see strength going down significantly. And again, you might feel a little weaker, right? You don't have as much energy coming into your body as if you were adding more calories. But all of those are going to be indications that I need to check myself and make sure I'm fueling and giving those amino acids to my muscles so that we're maintaining as much as possible without those extra building blocks of more calories.
Yeah, and I have these conversations all day, every day when I ask women, when they say I can't lose weight, I'm like, well, what are you doing? And I cannot tell you how often I hear the phrase, well, I'm trying to eat more protein. Well, are you trying it or are you doing it? Because trying and doing it are two very different things, right? And I'm glad you're trying to eat more protein, but track your intake and then you can just do it and not try to eat protein for months and wonder why you're not losing weight. Not to mention there's a lot more factors that go into that. So eating enough protein is step one. And nobody comes home from a long, stressful day and craves chicken breast, right? You're typically going to gravitate towards, especially if you're not diligently tracking or monitoring your intake in some fashion, you're probably going to gravitate towards more comfort foods, right? So like Jess said, most of the time in most scenarios, it's safe to assume that we intuitively probably don't eat the amount of protein that we need to, unless it's something you've been doing and practicing for a really long time. Even when I take time off and eat intuitively and then I go monitor and test how I'm doing, I tend to fall closer to 90 to 100 grams of protein. But when I'm intentional, I'm usually aiming for 130 to 140 per day when I'm in a season of wanting to change my physique and do all those things. So the intention behind that is great, but you have to actually do it. So eating enough protein is so, so crucial to prioritize fat loss over weight loss. And
there are different ways to monitor data. So Jill's talking about tracking macros to know exactly how many grams. You can also track, okay, let's estimate my serving sizes of meat per day, right? If I every lunch and dinner have a serving size of meat about the half the size of the palm of my hand, maybe for the next month, I add a serving size that's the size of the palm of my hand, and I add a third one for breakfast or a snack, right? I'm strategically increasing the amount of protein based on data. The data doesn't have to just be tracking macros, but you need a baseline to say that you're making progress, right? The last thing on that topic is also, I think we talk about not wanting to lose muscle mass. And I think because we're trainers, I don't want people to get the wrong idea and think, oh, well, we don't care about looking muscly, right? More muscle mass keeps you having a faster metabolism. Okay. So the more muscle you have on your body, the more calories you burn at rest all the time when you are not working out, which is why we say this is so important. What ends up happening oftentimes is women lose muscle during their poorly executed diets. It slows down their metabolism, which causes the rebound weight gain where they gain more back once they add food back in. If you can maintain that muscle mass during your diet, then when you add food back in, you don't have that extra fat gain on the back end.
Love it. Okay, number 2. So this one kind of goes a couple of different directions, but only eating like low calorie, high protein foods without prioritizing actual nutrients. So I came from the bodybuilding world, and this was like the only way that I knew how to diet at that time was choosing anything that said low fat, low carb, high fiber, high protein, making weird high protein powder only concoctions at home with 0-calorie syrup, right? Like always looking for these shortcuts. I drank so many diet sodas, and nothing is inherently wrong with that, but it was just, that was my way of navigating dieting because I was taking such a restrictive approach. And it usually backfires because then you just end up starving and overeating, which definitely was my life during that time.
You
So
feel crappy. It doesn't help your gut health. It doesn't help your energy levels. Like basically what's happening is great. You're in a caloric deficit and you're eating plenty of protein for your muscles, but then you're lacking minerals and vitamins and all these other things that help you at a cellular level. So we just want to add in whole foods, plants, berries, greens, rice, potatoes, salmon, steak, not just protein bars all day long. And again, Jill just talked about this.
You're already going to be low on those things, right? Because you're just taking in less food.
Yep. And Jill already touched on this, but it's like, okay, we have the health and like the cellular health standpoint of not getting enough nutrients. There's consequences to that, like hair loss or menstrual cycle starts to go, things like that. There's also the behavioral change piece where the binge restrict relationship, like you're so hungry all the time. I'll add in to this category, restricting entire food groups, right? People will say, well, I'm just going to cut carbs because I lose weight fast. And it's like, okay, but then what happens when you crave a carb or when you're out to dinner and it's your friend's birthday and you really want a slice of cake? It's like your body now doesn't know how to process this stuff, or you end up going the opposite direction because you're just really hungry and you see it as like a mental tug of war where you can't have this thing. So then when it's presented to you, you overeat the thing instead of having balance the whole time, whether at low or high calories.
And I think the mindset component around this is scarcity, right? So like you associate dieting with such a restrictive approach that you either feel like you need to fit in air quote like your treats or your favorites so that you don't go crazy, which most of the time you still end up doing that anyway, because like Jess said, you're not getting the nutrients you need to feel full and satisfied and healthy. Or it's almost like a shortcut with like cutting carbs. It's like, I don't have to think about it. I know it'll create a calorie deficit, but in reality, you're not going to cut carbs forever. So I feel like a lot of time when women are approaching dieting in this way, one, it's just, you don't know any better and that's okay. Obviously that's why we're here. But the other side of it is that you're looking for a means to get to your result and you want to get there the fastest because you actually aren't willing to make the lifestyle changes required to get the result and maintain it long term. So you're looking for a shortcut or a different avenue so that you can just cut corners and you're like, okay, low calorie this, high protein this. Look, I'm following all the rules, and you're trying to make it easier on yourself when in reality you're making it even harder on yourself because now you're coming to me saying my hormones suck, my metabolism suck. No matter how much I diet, I can't lose weight. You have to actually make the lifestyle changes, which is why when clients come into our program, we typically start with a maintenance phase, and not because we think 100% of women and people have metabolism problems. It's so that we can establish a healthy relationship with food, make sure you don't have nutrient deficiencies. If you have hormone issues, we want to make sure those are optimized before we attempt a deficit. We want to make sure that you understand how much protein you need in a day, right? So there's a lot that goes into that, but I think a lot of that is a little bit of scarcity, a little bit of, I don't want to change my behaviors, or I don't know any better. And that's not your fault either.
There's also this thing that happens that is wild. Like, and I think you and I both came from different backgrounds in terms of like, I ate clean in my head, right? I ate a lot of vegetables. But I wouldn't eat full fat Greek yogurt. I wouldn't eat avocados because they were high calorie, or I would measure my avocados because they were high calorie. what ends up happening is when you just primarily focus on shifting your foods to whole, colorful foods, you end up more full. So you end up
Naturally
consuming
eating
less
less.
calories.
Yeah.
Yeah, naturally you do that. Like we talk about this a lot because so many women ask about GLP-1s. Like you can increase your body's natural production of GLP-1s by just adding protein and adding fiber. Those things naturally also keep you full. Those things naturally also take more energy to burn in our body. They take more calories to process. So just by increasing your real nutrient intake, you're likely going to eat less food overall, and it's going to support making that caloric deficit easier.
Yep, love that. I think that's so true too. Like the other side of this, and then we'll move on to the number three, is that so many women's perception of what healthy is inherently
Wrong.
wrong, right? Like
Yeah.
sometimes we associate being skinny with being healthy, low calorie being healthy, and we see full fat Greek yogurt. I was that way too, where I would see that and be like, oh my God, I can't eat that much in one sitting. My meals, if they were over 300 calories, I would be like, that's way too much. Now my breakfast is like 600 to 700 calories, right? Because I get nutrients and I balance my intake and all of those things. So I think it's also the perception of what's healthy. And we tend to associate that like weight loss with health. And that's a whole other
Or
conversation.
with like, or with like health foods, because marketing has skewed our belief, right? Like things that look like the plant or animal that they came off of tend to be more nutrient dense than things that were processed in a lab to taste good. So a lot of times things will say health bar or health shake or whatever. And it's like, I mean, I have right now, I almost did a story on this today. In my fridge, I have some sort of like chai latte protein thing because I was going to add it to my coffee because I like the taste of it. It's like all organic, healthy, natural products, high protein. The first ingredient is like soy milk. The second ingredient is sugar. It is a sugar drink that has some added soy protein. That's all it is. But it's like marketed as this phenomenal health product. It's just a sugar drink, right? But they're able to say that on labels. So again, we look at these things because they say low calorie treat, low fat, whatever, and it does not give the context of all the nutrients that are in it.
Yeah, absolutely. And then number three, also common. I think this is just part misconception, part whatever. But trying to just focusing on burning calories. I see so many posts on Facebook that I'm like, oh my gosh, how are we still here? But it's like, I don't know why I'm not losing weight. I eat 1,300 calories, but I burn 1,700. So I'm in a 400 calorie deficit. And I'm like, oh my God, hold on. We are like totally focusing on the wrong things. And oftentimes that comes with like, I know I did this when I did Orange Theory. I was like, how many, I want to burn as many calories as I can. Or I would eat something that feel like, okay, that was 300 calories and I need to go burn X number of calories off, right? For one, that is extremely unhealthy mentally to have your relationship with food and exercise look like that. Also, fitness trackers, and we talk about this a lot, tend to overestimate or just be way wrong in terms of calories burned for an exercise. And if you look at the equation of daily energy expenditure, calories burned in exercise is like 5% of the total thing. So you are hyper focused on 5% and neglecting 95% of your calorie burn. And then you're scratching your head wondering why you're not making progress.
And I think we've done whole episodes on this before, but the way that energy expenditure works, the majority of your energy that is spent, the majority of calories burned daily is your base or resting metabolic rate, right? So how can we optimize your body as it is just sitting to burn as many calories as possible in the 23 hours of the day that you are not in the gym? That is what the adaptation of strength training does for us. If we can add muscle mass to our body, it actually speeds up that bit. If we can reduce stressors on the body and improve our sleep, it improves that bit, right? So we're really focused on improving that resting metabolic rate, not how many calories can I burn in a 45-minute class.
Exactly. Yeah. It's so much more about what you do. And I think this has been like a saying in fitness for a long time that it's not about what you do in that 1 hour a day. It's really that 23 hours of a day. And it kind of ties into
The
that. Right? It's
adaptation.
like, what is your body doing on its own? What are the adaptations? What have you trained it to do based on your inputs, right? So we have this like over reliance on calories burned, but then you're eating, like we said in number two, low calorie, low protein, low nutrient, low protein, low all of these things. And then you're like frustrated because you feel like you're restricting and you're going to the gym 7 days a week and wondering why you're not seeing progress. Not to mention, I just posted about this earlier today, but we also have adaptation. So like if you're hitting 10K steps a day, I love that for you. And that's great and healthy and all of those things. But if you're in a season of wanting to change your physique, you need to overcome that adaptation, whether it's 3K steps a day or 10K steps a day. Now, of course, if we're creeping into the territory of high step count, we have another conversation to have about overdoing it.
So we can adapt our body in either way.
Right.
So the cool part of that is like, you don't want to over rely on cardio during a deficit, or just add cardio to burn more calories during a deficit, because then what? When you come out of that deficit, now your body is geared up to expect that, right? It's used to that. So you need to now maintain that for life, right? So whatever we're adding in, we're adding the least in to see adaptation. Cardio is healthy for your heart. We are talking specifically about people trying to achieve fat loss during a deficit. Cardio is not the most optimal way to lose body fat.
Yeah, especially if you're concerned about like stress on your body being an issue. So strength training is your focus in a season of building muscle. I've even had people say, well, I'm trying to lose weight, so should I continue strength training? And it's like, yes, your focus should always be muscle, whether it's building it or preserving it. That should always be for fat loss.
And that, we program the exact same. And then we manipulate calories to determine if we are building muscle or losing body fat.
Yep.
Okay. So number 4, how not to diet. By only looking at the scale. Okay. So the scale is one data point. It is not the entire picture. We touched on this a little bit, but if your scale is going down and your inches are not going down, you could be losing the wrong type of weight and actually be becoming less healthy in a lighter body. So the body recomposition factor is huge here. We have clients take photos and do measurements and look at the scale. But we're also looking at other health markers, right? Like, how consistent can you be in this diet? How's your relationship with food? If you're starting to feel restricted, if you're skipping social events because you feel like you have to control your food, like all of those are indicators that, hey, this isn't a healthy time to do this right now, or maybe you're having to cut too low to see change and we need to spend more time at maintenance first. So we want to look big picture at a person's energy level, their strength, their inches, the scale. Like, we're looking at all these things, their libido, their hormone health, right? If somebody starts losing their menstrual cycle, I am absolutely recommending that they please stop dieting. Like, there's something underlying health-wise that you're causing havoc to because you're putting your body in a stressor.
Also, I'll use myself as an example. I was at a certain point in my cycle this past week, and I also had a very high sodium meal. And that day I also happened to just not consume my normal water intake. I was up 5, almost 6 pounds on the scale. Someone who didn't know any better would look at that and be like, oh my God, I'm dieting, I'm working so hard and it's not working. There are so many other reasons that the scale fluctuates. So if you only rely on the scale for data, you're going to hinder your progress, or you're going to overdo it and end up kind of in that like crash and burn scenario. Because like Jess said, there's so many other things that we need to look at. And if you're in a season of, you feel like you've been spending most of your life dieting versus spending time at maintenance, or just not dieting in general, you probably need to kind of reflect on like, what is my goal and where am I at, and what's the best direction to go here? Because if the scale dictates your whole day, pause on dieting and having that be your focus, and like, let's recalibrate before we go back and attempt a deficit again. Because realistically, if you're in a healthy place metabolically, you should be able to go into a calorie deficit, execute a diet, see progress, get what you want out of it, and then go right back to maintenance. But if you're reflecting on like, holy shit, I've been trying to diet for months or years, just stop for a second. And so many women are like,
for 6 months, a second, stop for 6 months to a year and work on building muscle.
I mean, honestly, I'll even take 3 months from you. Like, even if it's 3 months, do I think that's enough to like reset years and years of dieting? No, but what I'm saying is that you think, oh my God, 3 months is going to ruin my life. But like, what about the last 10 years you've been dieting? Like, what is 3 months really in the grand scheme of things, right? So relying on the scale can take you in the wrong direction, whether you're reverse dieting or dieting for sure. But if you are losing inches, especially in the early parts of a diet, I'll have people say, I've been dieting for 3 weeks and nothing happened. I'm like, have you taken inches? Well, my pants fit better. Then you're probably making progress.
Then you are losing
Always
body fat.
immediately reflect on the scale. So that's also important to know, especially if you're like new to strength training, but executing a diet, you're not going to see the scale go down right away. At some point, it will trend downwards because you have body fat to lose. But it's very possible for a newbie with like intentionally strength training to see muscle gain in a calorie deficit. Not typical for the average person, but it's just important to know that the scale is not a reliable piece of data in and of itself. I know we talk about this a lot, but honestly, I don't think we can stress it enough. So yes,
it's the number one data point that all women look at when they're coming to us.
Yeah.
The fifth thing on our list here actually ties right into that. So shifting gears too soon and changing your plan or dropping calories lower because you see the scale stay the same 1 week in a row, right? Like one data point does not show the big picture. I think Jill's example of like, okay, I had a high sodium meal, I had alcohol, whatever. It's the week before my cycle. All of those reasons have nothing to do with body fat gain. So let's say the scale goes up a pound and the person is like, oh my gosh, I need to cut calories lower. And it's like, hang tight for a couple weeks or get more data points and see what your trends are. It might have been 4 pounds lower yesterday and you happen to weigh in 1 day a week. And this is the number you're seeing. So let's collect data for a few weeks in a row, 2 to 3 weeks in a row before changing gears. It's not, fat loss is not linear. Weight is not linear, right? Fat loss, I guess, could be. But weight loss is not going to be linear. Your body is going to fluctuate. And then you also need to look at consistency because I think sometimes too, people think like, oh no, nothing changed this week. I better change the plan. And I'm like, well, our plan was this, but your actual inputs were this, right? So if your actual inputs aren't reflective of it, let's try to actually hit our goals this week and then see what happens. Because why drop calories lower if we don't have to? That's ridiculous. If we're already struggling to hit this number, I'm not going to say, well, just eat less. Like that's silly.
Yeah, it's like the example of like when I ask a woman how many calories she's eating and she's like, well, I've been trying to eat 1,200 calories. It's the same thing as trying to eat more protein. What are you trying to do? What are you actually doing? And then they'll say, oh, I'm set to 1,800, but I only eat 1,500, or I'm set to 1,200, but I typically eat 2,000 on the weekends. And it's like, okay, now we're getting somewhere. And it's crazy that we get in this like pigeonhole in our head sometimes where we don't even recognize those things that I'm pulling out of them. And then they start to say it and they're like, well, now I know I'm not making progress because I'm not actually hitting this number. And it's like, great. Okay. Next step, right? We're
data over feelings.
Yeah.
We always bring clients back to, well, what's the data telling us about your body's adaptations, right? Because that's the information. We're not letting emotions lead our choices. So when we say shifting gears too soon, again, this is very generic. This is not everybody is going to be individual, but typically we would bring clients through a muscle building phase for a minimum of like 2 to 3 months at a time, minimum. And then a diet phase, typically 3 months or so, right? Like, so anywhere between 8 and 14 weeks, I would say is pretty average. Now, if somebody's at 14 weeks and they're still losing weight every single week and they're not feeling restricted and it's going great, cool, we can keep going, right? Like, but at some point your body will plateau. So having that expectation ahead of time too, of like, what does this typical timeline look like? If my body isn't adapting at those low calories, why are you torturing yourself and being like, well, I have to stay here for 12 weeks because they said so? No, your body's giving you information, right? If nothing's happening, maybe you've been dieting way too long and it's time to stop dieting for a while.
Right. And I think it's hard
that.
to be like objective of yourself in that scenario, which this is why we coach, right? Because we can look at this data and see the big picture, and you're having a mental breakdown because like you feel like you're being perfect, but we're looking and we're like, hey, you haven't hit your proteins this week. You're averaging 1, maybe 2 lifts per week when you originally committed to 4. So like, yeah, 4 is on your calendar, but we have to look at what your inputs actually are. And then you use the word expectation. I think that's the other thing is we have this expectation that because we're working hard and because we started doing all these things last week, that we should have this nice, lean, progressive, like you said, like linear fat loss progress. And it's like, you haven't even tried that hard. Like you haven't even earned the result that you have in your head yet. And I think that's the other thing is that you have this expectation going into it. And I think if you go in with a realistic expectation and being a little bit more neutral around dieting and actually making a lifestyle change, you're not going to feel so let down all the time. Like I have a client who's been with me for about 2 months. Our first couple of check-ins, she was in such a tizzy and very emotional. Even and her inputs looked great. Like she was working really hard, right? And she still is. But I was like, listen to me. you came to me because you've been dieting all this time and you want to see these results and you just want to feel good and you want it to be forever. We're like on week 3 and you just committed to 12 months. We have at a minimum 12 months together. What's your rush? Where are you going? What do you need? Where do you need to be? Like, this is where you're meant to be. And this is the process. The evolution happens week over week of you being consistent and us looking at data and reflecting what's working, what's not, what do we need to change and what do we need to keep, right? So I think that's the other thing too, why tying back again to why every single client, we don't just jump into a deficit, because we want to make sure we're looking at big picture and giving you results forever and not just another typical weight loss program of lose X pounds in X weeks and then you go about your life continuing in the same restrictive cycle, right? So shifting gears too soon because you think you're entitled to more of a result than you actually are. And then adjusting based on, this is number 6, which kind of all went together with this, is what are your targets and what are your actual inputs and what do they look like, right? Like, I don't care what your MyFitnessPal says to eat. I don't care how many years you've been dieting. What are you actually doing today in the last 8 weeks, right? Audit yourself. And if you you look back and you audit that input and you're consistent with your protein, your workouts, your calorie intake, everything is aligned at 90% or more compliance, absolutely complain. I'm just going to tell you, you need to reverse diet and get back to a healthier place internally, and we need to dig deeper, right? But if your compliance is not at least 80% even, you need to check yourself and realize that you're asking for something that you don't even deserve right now, respectfully.
And we talk about this a lot, but for any new listeners, I want to reiterate, compliance does not mean perfection. It does not mean harder necessarily. It just means consistency in terms of inputs, right? So like, I have a client, somebody who used to be a client, who went to search for GLP-1s from an external provider. And that person reached out to me and said, hey, well, she said she's working out 4 days a week, really consistently. Nothing's happening. And I'm like, well, her goal was 4 days a week, but realistically, she was working out 1 day a week, sometimes no days a week. So like, I believe that fully was her intention, but she wasn't looking at her data when she's having this conversation about nothing's working, right?
Totally.
So we have to be objective.
That commitment, yeah.
Because we're working really hard, and it is hard, right? But again, I'm saying, I just want to recalibrate expectations that me and Jill, who do this professionally, do not work out 5 days a week. Like, maybe during some seasons of life we have in the past, but like my norm right now is 2 to 4 days a week. Most weeks I'm working out 3 days a week, but I'm doing it effectively. I'm progressively overloading. I'm doing it consistently. When I have to dial it back and only do 2 days a week because my kids are sick or I'm busy or whatever, I adjust and then I get right back to 3 or 4 days a week. So I say that to say consistency does not equal work harder, right? It's be consistent and look at the data.
It doesn't
also,
mean
if
sacrificing social events and your whole
Right.
life. What we give you, if you're being super intentional with protein and nutrients and sleep and lifting with progressive overload and lifting with intention, that's all we need from you. 3 days a week, consistency as most days a week, but lifting 3 days a week. If you're being intentional with those things, I just had this conversation too. You should not have to work out 5 days a week. If you have a trainer giving you 90-minute workouts, they have no fucking clue what they're doing. So recalibrate on that too.
And then we're talking about looking at data. Also, the data that you don't have doesn't not count, right? So if you aren't tracking at all Thursday through Sunday, but you're like, but I'm being really consistent Monday through Thursday or Monday through Wednesday or whatever, great. But we can assume that half of your week might be completely different than what you think it is. So again, this is not to be critical at all. It's just we need to assess objectively, not based on feelings.
Yeah. Okay. Number 7. I feel like this just ties into this too. Focusing on outcomes over your inputs, right? That's really what we just went through. You can't control the scale, but you can control your inputs and what you do and how you respond. And focusing on, if you focus on being the person and being the version of you that naturally hits her protein and goes to the gym consistently, even when she doesn't feel like it. And you prioritize sleeping 8 hours. And Jess, you actually like framed this in a podcast and I think it was so valuable in that initially it's going to feel really hard and time consuming to think about protein all the time. But when you make that effort on the front end to evolve your habits and behaviors and really integrate them into life and who you are, Jess and I don't think twice about protein anymore. Like, it's like brushing our teeth, right? Like, we're thinking about it, but it doesn't require effort anymore because it's just what we do and who we are and how we live our lives. And we just count colors in our diet and we make really nutrient dense food choices, and we know how to balance if we have maybe a not so nutrient dense food choice, what we need to do to recalibrate and reoptimize, right? So it's going to
But
feel
we've
hard
layered
initially, but
these
you have to just execution of that input. Yeah.
we've layered these habits on over time, and we've created systems to set ourselves up for success. So like my system for protein is I have one or two meats that are usually cooked in my fridge. As soon as I see one kind of running short, I go pull one out of the freezer so it's thawing now in my fridge, because future me is going to have to cook that meat or it's going to go bad. So like, am I going to feel like it when the time comes? Probably not, but I'm creating a system for myself. And now that's just my habit. I see that meat is running low, I go get something out of the freezer, right? So every single person's roadblocks are going to be different. Every single person's challenges are different. But eventually, when something becomes your new routine, it becomes easier. It doesn't mean you stop doing the thing. We still do the things that we first learned in our fitness journey, right? Maybe we're smarter. We work smarter now versus thinking we have to work harder or diet more. But yeah, the patterns become easier when they become automatic for you, and you have to think about it less. It becomes your go-to. So yeah, focusing on outcomes
You're
over
not just letting
inputs
the scale dictate everything.
yeah. And when it comes to data, again, I want to bring it back to like, if a client were coming to me, how might I ask them to evaluate their own inputs? If a client comes and freaks out because, oh my gosh, the scale went up 2 pounds, this isn't working, da 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 da. My first question, and again, I can see their data, but I'm going to ask them so that they can learn to assess this stuff on their own someday for when they're not working with me anymore, right? What was your average protein, calories, and fibers for the last 2 weeks? Go ahead and send me those for the last 2 weeks. And let's look at that first. And then they will be like, well, I don't really know what my protein was because I didn't check this weekend. And I'm like, okay, let's just get really consistent with that for 2 weeks and let's see what happens with the scale. And it can be that simple, right? You're panicking over these outcomes where we don't even know what the inputs are. It's a very, very simple project to assess, right? If we do have all the data, and the person says, oh no, my weight is up, and then they send me their calories, their proteins, and their fibers, and they're very aligned with our targets, I go in and I look at their inches. Oh, well, the scale's up, but your inches are down. Beautiful. We're still losing body fat. You must be a little bloated. Maybe there's some water retention going on, right? So we have all these steps of what we're looking at data-wise, so that we can adjust inputs if necessary. Okay,
Absolutely.
number 8, setting unrealistic goals. And I think that, again, social media, quick fixes like Activia or, there's been a million of them, right? Herbalife, like whatever the thing is of the day, will promise 20 pounds in a month or this blank amount of weight in this amount of time. Oftentimes those numbers are not healthy or realistic when it comes to actual body fat loss. So if you are losing 5 to 10 pounds a week, most likely you are not just losing body fat. There's some water weight coming off. Maybe there's some muscle mass coming off. A realistic, healthy rate of fat loss would be between 0.5 and 1% of your body weight per week on average. The reason I clarify and say on average is because, again, it is not linear. You might see the scale go up a pound and then go down 3 pounds the next week. But typically, most women are going to lose like between a half a pound and 2 pounds a week if they're losing body fat appropriately. Again, if you have more weight, if I've had clients who start with us and they're 360 pounds, they're going to be able to lose more because percentage wise, they have more body fat to lose. So again, right. 0.5 to 1% of your body weight week over week on average is appropriate. If you're losing a pound a week and you're like, this is taking too long, sorry to break it to you, but your expectations are not realistic.
Yeah. And also know that it's not, and Jess already said this earlier, but it's not ever going to be a straight line down of body fat. We oftentimes will have clients weigh more frequently throughout the week when they're in a deficit so that they can go off of trends, right? Because if your check-in's Monday and every Sunday you're lower on water or every Saturday you go out with friends, might be another conversation about your behaviors, but beside the point, you might check in every Monday and see the scale up and be like, oh my God, this isn't working. I'm not making progress, whatever. But your peaks, you'll notice that your highest weight of the week is slowly going to drift down if you weigh in more frequently. If your inputs align with your metabolism and all of that too, right? So those fluctuations are going to happen. It's also normal for a plateau to happen because whether you diet your way, Octavia's way, my way, it doesn't matter what way, your metabolism is always going to respond and function in the same manner. And it will eventually adapt to the calories that you're giving it over time, which is why we might make 5 to 10 macro and calorie adjustments through a client's fat loss phase, because we have to stay ahead of those adaptations for continued progress, which is why, one, consistency is important, because if you're not being consistent with your inputs, you have no idea how much or when to manipulate that nutrition variable. And then you also have to know, how much do I actually change this, right? And there's no blanket answer to that. It's, can you stick to this? How long have you been dieting? Are you in a healthy place metabolically? Can you even be consistent with your inputs? If you're at 1,300 calories and you can only stick to it 3 out of 7 days a week, is the answer for you to lower calories? Absolutely not. It's to reevaluate what your goal is right now and how you want to go about it. So it's really important to know that plateaus and fluctuations are normal and part of the process. But you have to be very objective and operate off of, like Jess said, data, not emotions, to know, is it time for me to call it on this attempt and go back to maintenance and like check things out and go back later? Or am I at a plateau and I still have some room to manipulate this phase that I'm in?
I have a couple tangents off of things you just said. One, going back to the weighing in more frequently. And I bring this up because I used to have an opposing stance where I thought we should weigh in less. If somebody mentally is stressed out by the scale, I do not want to cause some sort of obsession with that number, right? Oftentimes what we end up seeing actually is having clients weigh in more frequently and then showing them the other data relinquishes that power that the scale has over them, because they start to realize, oh, fluctuations are normal. Oh, I know this isn't body fat because I had alcohol last night, right? So they start to tell us why the weight jump is not a concern. And eventually they're like, this is crazy. The scale went up and I didn't even panic. Like, so getting more and more data and looking at it in that type of way actually can unwind those unhealthy mental patterns and obsessions with the scale. And then also, to go off of your comment about plateaus, and like if somebody's not losing at 1,300, or if they're at 1,300 and they can't stick to it, know that plateaus will happen because our bodies adapt to the inputs that we give it, right? So to go off of that, I kind of want to bring us back to the point that you want to do the least possible work to achieve optimal results so that you can keep that runway going for as long as possible. So like if somebody currently is eating, let's say 2,000 calories, and they cut right down to 1,300, will they see weight loss? Yes, they will. But what happens when you then adapt to 1,300? You don't have much more to go, and you are now super restricted, and it's probably really hard to hit your protein numbers and get enough nutrients at 1,300 calories. Like, neither of us recommend that clients drop down that low. So instead, why don't we try starting at 1,800? And if that client starts losing 0.5 to 1% body fat week over week, beautiful. We don't have to cut lower. Now, someday they're going to adapt to that amount. When they do, maybe we drop them down to 1,700 or 1,650. And we ride out those adaptations for as long as possible until they adapt to that. Like, plateaus are inevitable. It does not mean something's wrong. When that ultimately happens and you found that low point for you, that's when you can't be consistent anymore, and or when your body is not responding anymore, that's the time to go listen to our previous episode and bring yourself through a strategic muscle building phase. Increase your calories back up.
Absolutely. And that's a great point, in that someone could drop right to 1,300 and somebody could gradually drop, and they could really lose the same amount of weight in the whole deficit. But typically you would think, oh, if somebody's eating 1,300 calories for 12 weeks, but the other person is eating 1,800 and 1,700 and 1,500, whatever, you would think they would lose less, but that's because their compliance is probably higher than the person that dropped to 1,300. So back again to the inputs, you might be attempting 1,300, but are you hitting that 7 days a week?
Behaviorally, we find that is less likely.
Less compliant, yeah.
Okay, and then number 9, we only have 10, we're getting close here. Number 9, mistakes in dieting, staying in the diet too long. So once you have hit that plateau and your body is not responding for a while, you have a couple options. Are we going to drop lower, or are we going to build back up? And again, a lot of women are scared to build back up because they're like, oh, but I really want to see the scale drop. And it's like, okay, but the scale isn't dropping. Something is going on, or your body has adapted at this low place. So what are your options? We drop lower, and if compliance is already hard at this whatever number you're at, then that's not going to work, right? or we now are back to that muscle building phase, back to reversing your calories back up higher. So if you stay in a diet, like we shouldn't be dieting most of our year, which a lot of women do. They pop back up and they're like, okay, I've been up at higher calories for 6 weeks. Let me diet again. And it's like, why are you so excited to diet? We should be spending the majority of our life fueling our bodies and maintaining. And then when we do diet for maybe 3 months a year, it's super impactful and our body actually responds really, really well. The prolonged diet backfires not only on your responsiveness to future diets, but also on your health markers. It's a major stressor on your body. So whenever that's happening, that's causing stress on your gut microbiome and on your gut lining and on your hormone health and on your cortisol. Like all these other things are impacted. Even if you're like, well, I don't feel stressed. It's like, I get it, but that's a physical stressor on our body. If our body thinks that we're not getting enough fuel and it's having to find these resources, and it's going to pare down the other systems that are optimal and thriving, right? Like our body needs to live before it can reproduce. So reproductive things start shutting down, right? Like all these fun accessory things are not now the priority if we only have this scarce amount of resources to work with towards our systems.
Yeah, absolutely. And we talk about diet periodization, and that's just a really fancy term for not living in a diet, right? It's just not endlessly dieting. Now, I don't think that everyone's entire life needs to be put into phases and defined points, right? But if you are in a season of your life where you want to change your physique, you need to go through periods of dieting that are intentional and strategic and short-lived and back to maintenance. Now, I typically say when I have women consulting for our services that you're probably going to need more than one fat loss phase. Unless you're only looking to lose like 10 pounds or body recomposition, then you might not even diet at that point. But ultimately, it's safe to assume that if you have like 20-ish pounds or more to lose, that you're probably going to need more than one diet cycle. And that's for a lot of reasons. That doesn't mean you can't lose all 20 pounds in one dieting cycle. However, we have to account for life happening. We have to account for maybe seasons where we're not as consistent, or the kids go back to school and you can't go to the gym like you used to, or the holidays, maybe you just want to maintain through those, right? So it's really important to account for all of that. And also, building muscle takes time. Optimizing your hormones takes time if you feel like that's a factor, which typically it is these days. And if you feel like you've been dieting for a long time and your body needs a little bit of restoration support, that's also going to be a component in this process. Not to mention, let's say we optimize everything on the front end and you have great behaviors and inputs and all of those things, and your body responds well to a fat loss phase. Now the next step is to make sure that we tie a bow and put it on top before we send you on your way, that you know what is needed from you to maintain those results forever without having to diet or track or do all of those things that we did in this temporary season of life, because that's really what it should be. Dieting consumes, I think, a lot of women's entire adult lives about how does this outfit fit? What is this picture going to look like? I don't want to go to this because I don't feel good. When in reality, it seems far-fetched and it's really not. You should diet, get the change that you want, and just maintain and live your life and have a neutral relationship with food and the scale and love your body and all of those things while continuing to make improvements, right? There's never really an end game to that. But I want you to understand that's really what it should be. So
there can be an end game to dieting and to tracking macros. Like there can be an end. Right. There can be an end game to that, but then the healthy habits need to continue to maintain. Right. So I think that is a great segue into our 10th one, which is not having an exit plan is a plan to fail. Right. So if you are thinking that you're just going to cut really low and you're going to lose the weight and then we'll see what happens, it's like you're not planning on how am I then going to maintain that. So a question we often ask is like, okay, is this something you think you could continue for the rest of your life? Right. If somebody says, I want to work out 6 days a week, I'll say, okay, for how long? Like, what can you actually commit to on your worst week, right? For me, I'm telling you guys right now, 2 days a week is pretty solid on even my worst weeks. I'm pretty consistent with that, right? So maybe I make a plan and most of my workout plans are 3 to 4 days a week. And then some weeks I can only get in 2. But you want to make a plan that works in your life, not something that you can stick to for 6 weeks and then you have to bounce back because you're burnt out. Like that's a good way to gain the weight back. What happens when you hit your plateau, right? We already talked about this. At some point, your body will adapt to low calories. You don't want to just live there forever to have to maintain it. We need to know how to strategically add calories back in while building muscle and adding protein so that you don't gain body fat as you're adding calories back in. Because ultimately the goal is we lose inches and or body fat. We've created this new physique. The goal is now to maintain that new physique at higher calories, whether tracking, whether weaning off of tracking, starting to intuitively eat, right? Like both of us do not track most of the time at this point in our life. That's our goal for all of our clients, is to wean them off of tracking and teach them to listen to their bodies in the new physique that they love and they feel really comfortable and healthy in. And then they have this tool of, if my jeans start to fit a little snug, I have this tool of macro tracking that I can pop back in and do for a couple months if I want to lean up before a trip, right? It should not be a forever thing.
Love it. Okay. So those are really like our 10 points that we wanted to hit home for things that you want to make sure you're not doing if you're executing a diet, or how not to diet. Basically, if you do all of these things, your diet will suck and you won't get results and you'll diet forever. And that's not what we want for anybody. So dieting
so negative.
Short term and
It's not so negative. I promise. Like, we don't coach to negatives. We coach to what we can do, what we can control.
But that's what it is, right?
Most of the women who are struggling in these yo-yo cycles are doing all these things over and over and over. And they're like, I don't know why it's not working. So anyway.
Definition of insanity. I say this probably every day. You're doing the same thing and expecting something different to happen. But I want that to sound a little negative, honestly, because if you're like, oof, I'm doing 6 out of 10 of these, you need to reevaluate. You're going to be stuck in this cycle for a really long time, and that's not what we want for you. So this is how not to diet. Again, if you didn't catch last episode of how not to reverse diet, that's going to also be something that's worth listening to if you start implementing diet periodization, as you should if you're in a season of physique change. So hope that was helpful, and we will see you guys next time.
Bye.